Okay, welcome. This is the code and example run through for the program. So first we're gonna go through the program. So when you first, so before we start, it's just gonna be me and Mallory because at the time of recording, a lot of our group mates are busy with finals or just something else. So it's just me and Mallory, but all of the group mates here and not here, we all worked very hard on this project, and I would never change them for the world. Anyway, let's continue while running. So when you first click here, it's ask how many players you want. For 8, we'll just select 5. And do you want to play with extensions? Yes or no? Either way, it's fine. And Mallory?
All right, so when you first start the game, it'll be your turn first since you're player one. So it's the pop up, you press OK, and then you can start the game. To start your turn, make sure to roll the dice. So this is your first roll. And then the pop up explains it that when you want to re roll, select. So close the pop up, and then so you can't re-roll the bombs, but say I don't want the 2 target, I can click that, and then I have to select dice again, and that will re-roll it. Oops, dynamite. So we get a pop-up, and then that's the end of the turn for me. It then moves forward to the next player's turn.
Yes. So and when a computer is running, all the user has to do is just press continue. Every time the user will press continue, it will iterate one role for that player. So it's like here we see the second row for Rose, the third one, and after the third one, everything gets calculated. They make their decisions on who to attack, and then it's the next player's turn, and we keep doing this until it's back to our turn, and then there's a definite winner. So since that's a small introduction for our program, now we're gonna go through the classes that we have. So the main class that really has like every aspect of um like the back end of the game is the game class. It has the players, the roles, the characters. So so how this works is in Project 3, um there's only one meth call to the board, which then starts the board, and in the board it calls a game. And in the game, once you call the game, it will start saying how many players, how many users are playing, and then it will also take in the board. And so after the game, so in the game constructor, we set how many players are alive, how many players are there, the number of arrows in the middle, and if there is an expansion or not, we also set that. So we also have if there's a zombie outbreak, it's also false. And then at the end of the game around here, we have um, setting up the user players and the comp players, and we go to setup, which then sets each player in the player array. We give them a random non-repeating character, and according to those characters, we give them a an ability, and after that, we assign them a role. So in so we'll get to the role class later, and so after the role class or after assigning roles, set up that it then goes back to the board class, which then calls game or turn. The turn also takes an horizontal box just to help with the updating the dice in the middle of the pane. So and the turn does everything. It rolls the dice, sets sets which one to roll and which not to roll, and um and at the end it also analyzes the die, and if the current player is the correct um character for the attribute with the attributes that pertain to that die, they will ask if the game will ask the user in a pop-up if they want to use their ability, and they'll click yes or no. And according and regardless of the ability, you depending on the ability, it will let you can decide who to choose, or if you want to discard your arrows, just whatever the ability is. And after that, after the game, it returns back to the board, which then calls game next player, and then it refreshes everything on the GUI to match the status of what just happened in this turn, and then a new turn happens. So there's multiple things that can happen in a turn. So for example, a player can lose life from especially a 1 or a 2. Um, so if they're from a 1 or a 2, we call this function lose life. So in lose life, there's a player and attacker. The attacker is the current player, and the target is the player that's being targeted. And there's 3 characters in here that have um, abilities that when you lose life, you do blank. And we have all those 3 characters, and if they want to use their abilities, we let them do so. There's also an Indian attack. An Indian attack happens when the middle arrows reach 0, and then and then everyone gets their respective health from it. And if your ability pertains Indian attacks, then your abilities are also here. Duels is from expansion 2, and um, the duels will take an attacker or target, the current player, and the target that they want to duel with, and a duel die, and then it rolls until one player doesn't do a duel die, first going for target. Outbreak is also an expansion 2 in the Undead or Alive module. And this runs if there are more undead than live players, and it sets everyone's stats to their respective. So if you're a zombie, you're set to how many players are alive, and that's your health. And if you're a renegade, you are set to a zombie master, which you also have full health, and your abilities are true. So yeah, that's in the game. It's the longest program in uh in the base project, the um uh back end of the project. So next we're gonna go to Mallory for the master role and role. So Mallory.
Okay, so the roles are, of course, sheriff, outlaw, deputy. Those, just wanted to clarify what exactly that was. Uh, and I created the master role class because depending on how many players there are, depends on how many of each role can be assigned. So there's a method to use that number to then make an array list containing the possible roles available. So if there's 4 players, then there's 1 sheriff, 1 renegade, and 2 outlaws. And then if there's more, then different roles are added to the list. So then in the player class, they are you can that's where the player is assigned the role. So through that, the array list that was made in the master role class is passed to the role class, and then a random role is assigned to the player, if that makes sense. Another part of these 2 classes is the depending on your role depends on how a player wins, right? So deputies and sheriffs win if they get rid of the outlaws and renegades. The outlaws win if the sheriff is killed. So that's really important. And the master role will go through all the players and see if any of them is has won. And through that, it's passed into the role class where you see the player's individual role and what is needed to happen for them to win. So these two classes really coexist together in order to function properly
Good.
because there are different levels to the role class.
Okay. The next will be the roll dice and the die. Mallory, do you want to do that or should I?
Uh, sure, I can do that. So, of course, the die class is in charge of creating a singular die. Uh, so it's got uh, it will choose the face of the die that will pop up when the roll die class happens. And then
Sorry to burst your. Sorry about
is
that.
that wrong?
Yeah. So, um, to reinstate, the die will um has faces, has two attributes called reroll and choose roll. Reroll if it's able to be rerolled, and choose roll if the player chooses to reroll it. And that's really the only thing for a die. It's what face it is, if it can be rerolled, and if it is going to be rerolled. In the roll dice, it's where, as Mallory said, it will choose the face of the die, um, and it will also use any expansions needed. So when we first call roll dice, it sets up 5 dice, and then when we roll dice, and then we want an expansion, we it it sets that as well. As you see, there is an array of each dice, and each element of the array is the face of that die. So yeah, there's roll dice, there's a duel, there's get dice. So and set expansion 1, expansion 2. It sees if the player wants expansion 1 or expansion 2, and if it does, it sets it accordingly. And yeah, so the way the game class works with this is that it just calls roll dice over and over to get dice, and the logic in here will not roll dynamites and will not roll unchosen dice. So the player class, the comp brain, the comp, and the user are all together in a way. Um, Jeffrey created these classes, and so the class that the game works with the most is the player class, and I've worked some with it to incorporate expansions as well, like the Chief Arrow expansion, the Zombie Masters, and the Zombies. Basically, this is the super class to both user and comp, as they are both a player and they both have health, they both have characters, they both have arrows, and the number of their roles. So all of that are the same. So the game will manipulate and change all the attributes of that player accordingly. So in the user class, the user is the human player that is playing. There's typically, excuse me, there's typically only one user in a game. So in here, when we call user, we just make a player, call the player construct with with the second uh, um, with the second parameter to be true, so it can be a user, and it can have, and so on move it We don't really use the move because the game class already has that. So really, the user class really just sets up a player to be a user. And in comp, it's the opposite. When we call it comp in the game class constructor here, we call comp, and then we give them a number, which then um, it's their corresponding index number in the player array in game. And when we call comp with the index number, it calls the player constructor with the second parameter to be false. So it won't be a user and it will be treated as a computer. The comp brain is our interface. Um, Jeffrey created the comp brain to uh, Jeffrey created the comp brain to unify all of the um, things the comp brain needs as to detect an ally, to find the best target, and to find the target for that corresponding player. And look, it's just Jeff that we were talking about. Okay. Hey, Jeff, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, we're just talking about the players and the user and comp. So if you want to just reiterate like everything I just said, I don't mind. Yeah, so you can talk about the player class, the comp, the user, and the comp rate class.
Okay. Well, the player class is the parent class of both user and comp. It handles everything that is shared in common no matter who the player is, such as their player number, whether or not they are a user, their health, their arrows, uh, their dice, their whether they're alive or not, whether they're a zombie or not, depending on whether the player included expansions. Um, I think I covered most everything in the game. However, the user and comp is where it splits off. So the user class doesn't really do much right now, but that's because we found that it would be better to take care of some of the stuff in other places. But the user is basically there to facilitate the user's access with the program. So right now, it just tells the player class that the current player is a user, and in case we need to expand or do further debugging on anything, it has methods in there as well, just to kind of single out anything that might be happening. But over in the comp class, there's a lot here. Firstly, the comp passes the false boolean up to the player class. That way, the player class knows that this is not a user. The comp also uses the allies array list to keep track of what roles it should be its allies. And you can see this with the get ally list method at the bottom of your screen there. It basically just calls the get allies method from the role class and saves those into the allies array. The method right above that will determine an ally, and basically, since the only role that every player will know is the sheriff, it just goes through, and if there's a sheriff player, um, then it will determine whether or not they are on the sheriff's team. Otherwise, it'll just return 0, which is unknown or neutral. Scrolling down a little bit, the determine ally is used in these two methods that are on your screen, the find best target and find target method. The find target method is what is called from the game class, and the first thing it does is it gets its ally list, just to double check things. It creates an array of the potential targets, which are the two players that the computer player can target, and then it passes those to the find best target method, which take both of those and just determine if one is an ally, then it needs to attack the other one. If one is an enemy, so let's say the computer player is an outlaw and it needs to get rid of the sheriff, then it will purposefully target the sheriff. Otherwise, if it doesn't know the role of either player, it'll just randomly shoot. Going down a little bit further, we see the ability check method, And this just checks if the computer player should use the given ability. So in the case that the chief arrow is pulled, the computer player will only use that ability if it has a reasonable chance at having the most arrows when the Indians attack. That way it doesn't take any damage. So for now, it's just checking if it has more than 3 arrows, because having 3 arrows is a reasonable amount to say that you're in the running for having the most. If it's Bell, she's aggressive and she will always want more Gatlings. She wants to be able to stay alive and help her team. Slab will only double his attack if he has half his health or more. Otherwise, he will gladly take the healing to make sure he stays alive. Rose always wants to be sneaky. She's just like that. Calamity. Calamity is where it gets a little complicated. If the dice rolled is a 1, and Calamity is not one of the last 2 players, she will go ahead and use it. Because if Calamity is the last of 2 players, then there's no point in adding or changing that 1 to a 2, because the 1 is her best chance of attacking anyways. Conversely, if the dice rolls a 2 and Calamity is one of the last 2 players, well, there's no point in rolling a 2. You might as well change that to a 1. So she'll use the ability in that case. And otherwise, it just breaks out of the switch statement and returns false. No need to use the ability.
Okay.
And as for the roll dice,
Oh yeah, you can
you can go
continue.
ahead if you want to cover it.
No, I don't.
Okay.
You can cover it.
For the roll dice, there's a lot here, but basically what it breaks down to is given the initial dice roll, or given the initial state of the computer player at the start of their turn, they will choose to roll or not, and given which dice they get, it will decide whether they want to re-roll or not, which is at the bottom of your screen here in comp re-roll, which will return, as you can see, a list with the generic die, just so we can further process it. And in this, it will check what all the dice are, since you can only re-roll a certain amount of times. And as you can see, it will keep Gatlings if there are less than 2. If there are more dynamites, then it can't roll, so it'll immediately return the list of dice. And then if its health is below a certain amount, it will keep beer and reroll shots. Otherwise, it'll do the opposite. It'll reroll beer and keep shots. And then down at the bottom, it will always reroll a bullet. It will keep whiskey if it's only missing a couple of points of health. Otherwise, it'll just go ahead and reroll it. And then lastly, there's a bit of logic here. It will duel unless it's at a low health. And then lastly, in the brain interface, this just provides a couple of templates for the comps to use. If for some reason there were another game similar to Bang that needed to be programmed, this would be a good interface to use for whatever the CPU needs are in that game, because in any game where you need to find a target, you're going to need to figure out who your potential targets are, who your best target is, and if those targets are potential allies.
It's good. So that covers the back end of the project. So the front end is the GUI, which is the view folder. Um, there, well, most of the GUI, their class title says it all. Like the dialog boxes are just if asking the player if they want to use their abilities. Shriyesh made all of the GUI, and so props to him. He's very busy right now, so he couldn't make it today. So the majority of or all I should say the Java files in the view folder are used by the board. The board itself is what the project 3 will call to start the GUI and furthermore start the game. So whenever we call the board, it from here it we start it and then we go to start. We go to start, and then we set like the the Windows name, the number of players, each player's characters or role that's not displayed. To so the only thing that's displayed right now is the role of the user, the character of the user, the life points of the user, and how many arrows. So this right here is called all in the board class, and it uses all of these. It uses the drop down dialog box to ask the user how many players. It uses the OK dialog box when um when there's something happening in the game.
Like more of an announcement thing,
Yeah.
Indian attack, dynamite,
Mhm.
stuff like that.
Uh, for the ability dialog box, this is called from the game class whenever there's an ability that needs to be activated by the user, like if they can, they don't want to use it. And um, yeah, so all of the pictures and the icons are all in the assets folder. They have with all PNG, they're all there, and they all help create what we have, the Bang Dice game. So yeah, that's the program run through and the code run through for the Bang Team 3.